Good evening. In my city, marriage contracts can be enforced by armed witnesses. That is not a metaphor. If a house debt crosses a certain threshold and your family signs collateral against an executive syndicate, the ceremony clerk arrives with two legal guards and a case of seals. People call it civil resolution, as if changing the name makes it cleaner. I was standing in my father's machine shop when the clerk came for me. The power had cut twice that morning. Rain leaked through the cracked skylight and dripped onto the old lathe my father refused to sell, even after we sold almost everything else. I was under a chassis frame with grease up to my elbows, trying to coax one more week out of a courier bike transmission, when I heard polished shoes on concrete. Nobody with polished shoes came to Dock Ward South unless they were lost, og collecting, or both. "Aaron Vale," a woman said. I slid out from under the frame and hit my head on the axle for the trouble. The woman wore a gray legal coat with silver piping at the collar, municipal registry insignia on one side, private enforcement crest on the other. Behind her stood two guards in matte black, with restraint cuffs visible at the belt. My father stood by the office partition, shoulders collapsed in a way I had only seen once before when we buried my mother. My first thought was tax seizure. My second thought was that my father had finally lost to the creditors. Both thoughts were too small. The clerk opened a hard case on the workbench and removed a folded contract tablet, 3 wax seals, and a thin black ring set in velvet. By authority of district debt arbitration and undersigned guarantor transfer agreement, you are summoned to immediate union ceremony with registered principal Celine Ardent, chief executive of Ardent Grid Holdings. And I laughed. Not because it was funny, because I thought I had misheard a full title and my own name in the same sentence. Who? The clerk did not blink. Celine Ardent. Even in Dock Ward, people knew that name. Everyone knew it. Ardent Grid owned half the private power relays that kept the upper sectors lit and the lower sectors dependent. She was the woman on news screens standing beside ministers, never smiling fully, speaking in numbers while whole districts argued over ration tariffs. Cold, efficient, untouchable. The kind of person whose decisions arrived as outages and price changes. I looked at my father. "What did you sign?" He did not answer right away. His mouth opened and closed once. Then he said, "It was restructuring, temporary collateral. They said if we met the quotas." "What collateral?" The clerk tapped the contract tablet and rotated it toward me. "Debt-backed marital guarantor transfer. Your father's company defaulted under emergency energy procurement terms 18 months ago. The principal declined liquidation and exercised Clause 9, household integration by designated successor." I wiped my hands on a rag that was already filthy and read the line 3 times because the words refused to become a real thing. Designated successor. Me. "Why would she choose me?" I asked. The clerk's expression didn't change. "The principal submitted a standing designation years ago. That landed harder than the marriage clause, years ago." I looked at my father again, and this time he looked away. The workshop went very quiet, except for rain tapping the skylight and the old relay meter buzzing in the office corner. "Explain," I said. He sat down on the stool by the parts cabinet like his knees had given up negotiating. "Aaron, when you were little, after your mother died, the shop was gone. We were done. We had nothing. Someone intervened." "Someone?" He swallowed. "A trust. Anonymous at first." "You," the clerk corrected him with professional precision. "Not anonymous. Masked beneficiary under juvenile protection protocol." My hands went cold. I knew about the trust. Not the details. Just the outline. Everyone in my family used it as a shield whenever I asked how we survived those first years. A benefactor, a debt forgiveness structure. Scholarship support when I got into the district technical school. Medical coverage when I broke my arm at 14. Rent stabilization when the landlord doubled rates during the flood season. Every time I pushed for names, my father said the papers were sealed and the donor wanted privacy. "You're telling me," I said slowly because the room seemed to tilt if I moved too fast, "that Celine Ardent has been funding us since I was a kid. My father stared at the floor. Helping, not funding everything. On what condition? Silence. I looked back at the contract tablet. Buried beneath the arbitration clause was a line tagged Beneficiary Continuity Option. Cross-reference to a sealed file. My name and birth registry number sat beside it. The clerk placed the black ring on the workbench as if she were setting down a tool. You may contest in court after execution of the civil union. Refusal at this stage triggers immediate liquidation of guarantor assets, eviction within 48 hours, and criminal review of fraudulent collateral concealment. I turned to my father so fast the rag tore in my hand. Fraudulent what? His voice broke on the first word. I hid part of the debt. I thought I could cover it before they audited. You thought what? That it would disappear? I thought I could keep you out of it. The clerk, to her credit or cruelty, let him finish before speaking again. Mr. Vale's concealment voided prior leniency terms. My father finally looked up. There was shame there, yes, but also fear. Real, animal fear, not of prison, and not even of losing the shop. Of me understanding the shape of the bargain too late. Don't sign because of me, he said, which would have meant something if 2 guards had not been standing behind the clerk. I stared at the ring. I knew almost nothing about Celine and Ardent, except the public version. Precision-tailored suits, acquisition wars, infrastructure speeches, the expression of someone who had already calculated the cost of your objection. I knew she was older than me by at least 15 years. I knew every paper called her ruthless and then asked her for comments. I knew my district cursed her company during every outage. I did not know why my name was on a standing designation from years ago. That question sat in my chest heavier than the contract. I should tell you I made a speech. I did not. I asked one thing. If I sign, I said to the clerk, my father stays in the shop? Pending compliance review and debt freeze execution, yes. And if I don't? She did not need to answer. I signed. The clerk sealed the tablet with my thumbprint, pressed the wax stamps, and slid the ring case toward me. One of the guards stepped forward with a witness slate while the other remained by the door, polite and unnecessary at the same time. My father started crying quietly and tried to hide it by pretending to cough. I hated him for it for exactly 3 seconds, then hated myself instead. By dusk, I was in a black municipal car crossing the river into Upper Crescent, watching Dock Ward lights thin out behind rain-streaked glass. No one spoke during the drive. The city shifted as we climbed. Rusted floodgates and patchwork roofs giving way to clean facades, bright transit rails, private security towers, and those impossible upper sector avenues where even the trees look managed. I had been in the upper sectors before for repair jobs, but never this deep, never escorted, never with a marriage contract in my coat pocket. Ardent House sat on a ridge above the eastern power canals, all dark stone, glass corridors, and quiet guards. Not a mansion in the old noble style. Worse, modern enough to look efficient. A place built by someone who did not need to prove wealth because the proof was already in the grid beneath your feet. They took me through a side entrance, past 2 biometric doors, into a preparation room where 3 staff members waited with a suit, a medic kit, and the expression of people instructed to move quickly and never explain more than necessary. One of them, an older man with silver gloves and a tailor's measuring band around his neck, looked at my grease-stained hands and said, "We'll need 10 minutes. You're assuming I'm cooperating." He met my eyes once in the mirror and said, "No, sir. I'm assuming the ceremony starts at 8. That shut me up because I had no better move and he knew it. They cleaned me, dressed me, and covered the cut on my forehead from the axle. A medic scanned my wrist, checked my stress markers, and asked if I was taking any stimulants. I almost laughed again. In Dock Ward, coffee counted as a stimulant. When they were done, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. Black formal jacket, high collar shirt, family crest placeholder pinned where a personal emblem would go if I had one. I looked like a poor man dressed as someone important for a role he hadn't auditioned for. At 7:58, the door opened. "Ready," said a woman's voice from the hallway. I turned before I could stop myself. Celine Ardent stood in the doorway wearing white and charcoal, not a bridal gown in any traditional sense, but a ceremonial executive coat cut like armor. Her hair was pinned back. No jewelry except one signet at her left hand and a thin chain disappearing beneath the collar. She was beautiful in the way winter is beautiful. Clean lines, no softness offered by accident. Her face was exactly the face from the screens. Except in person, it was harder to read, and far more tired around the eyes. She looked at me once, head to toe, taking in the borrowed suit, the fresh cut, the obvious anger. Her gaze paused at my forehead. "You're bleeding through the sealant," she said to the medic behind me. The medic stepped forward immediately. "I can It's fine," I snapped. Celine's eyes came back to mine. No flinch, no offense, no performance. "Then we proceed." That was our first exchange. No greeting, no apology, no explanation. The ceremony took place in a private registry chamber inside the house, smaller than I expected, with legal screens set into stone walls and 3 witnesses from the district arbitration office waiting beside a suspended contract sigil. No family from my side except my father on a remote feed, gray and ghost-like in the corner projection. No visible family from hers at all. 2 company counsel, 1 magistrate, 4 guards at the perimeter, because apparently even marriage needed perimeter control in her world. The magistrate read the union terms in a voice practiced enough to make coercion sound administrative. Asset freeze, debt integration, public statement delay, personal residence transfer, confidentiality under Commercial Protection Act. There were so many clauses tied to my existence before I said a word that it felt less like a ceremony and more like being entered into an inventory system. When the magistrate asked if either party wished to amend the stated terms, I said, "Yes, I want to know why I was designated years ago." Every witness in the room went still. Celine did not look at the magistrate. She looked at me. "Not here." "That's not an amendment. That's the only reason I'm standing here." The magistrate cleared his throat. "Mr. Vale, this proceeding is for execution, not private disclosure." I cut him off. "Then stop calling it a union like I have choices." One of the guards shifted. Company counsel glanced toward Celine, waiting for a signal. She gave none. Instead, she said, in the same flat, controlled tone she had used at the doorway, "Include a private disclosure conference within 24 hours, binding and recorded, limited to beneficiary continuity file and juvenile trust structure." The magistrate blinked. "Ms. Ardent, that file is under seal. Petition exception under principal authority. Add it." He hesitated exactly long enough to reveal he was not used to being contradicted by anyone in the room except her, then amended the clause. That was the first time I saw her do something for me. Not kindness, not yet, but movement. We completed the vows as required by civil code. No poetry, no promises. Just legal affirmations and biometric seals. When she slid the ring onto my hand, her fingers were cold. When I returned the gesture, I noticed a faint scar crossing the inside of her wrist, almost hidden beneath the ceremonial cuff. Old. Surgical or restraint, I could not tell. The contract sigil flared gold, then settled into white. Done. Married. The magistrate congratulated us like a man reading weather data. The witnesses signed. The remote feed cut before I could look at my father again. Counsel began discussing statement timing with staff before the chamber had even cleared. It was efficient, obscene, and somehow quieter than I expected. I thought they would send me to a guest wing and post guards outside the door. Instead, Celine dismissed nearly everyone with a look and said, "Walk with me." No one objected. We moved through a long glass corridor overlooking the eastern power canals. Night had settled fully, and the canal lights ran in clean blue lines beneath us, carrying current to districts my friends and I had spent winters cursing by candlelight. Somewhere below, turbines hummed. The glass reflected us side by side. Her in white charcoal armor silk, me in a suit cut to fit a stranger, both wearing rings that looked more like restraints than ornaments. I spoke first because if I waited any longer, I would say something worse. "How long?" She did not pretend not to understand. "Since you were 6. I stopped walking. She took 2 more steps before stopping too, then turned to face me. "My mother died when I was 6, I said. "I know." The answer came too fast, too softly. I hated the way my chest tightened at it. "Did you know her?" A pause, small, but there. "Yes." Everything in me went sharp. "How?" Celine looked past me at the canal lights for a moment, as if arranging facts in a sequence she trusted. "Your mother, Mara Vale, worked in an Ardent subsidiary clinic before the merger years. Not in medicine. Records, intake routing, and eligibility adjudication. We met when I was still in operations." I stared at her. My mother had worked in clinics, yes. I knew that. I remembered forms and late shifts and the smell of disinfectant on her coat when she came home. But no one had ever mentioned Ardent. In Dock Ward, people forget affiliations when companies rebrand and districts collapse. Celine continued, still measured. She prevented a fraud transfer that would have buried a series of lower ward pediatric care denials. She did it knowing it could cost her job. It cost more than that. I felt my heartbeat in my throat. Say it clearly. She was targeted after she reported it, not officially. There was an accident in the transit underworks that should have been investigated as sabotage. The corridor seemed to narrow. My mother died in an underworks transit fire. I had been told it was a systems failure. Everyone was told that. A Dock Ward gets many versions of systems failure. "You're saying she was killed," I said. Celine met my eyes. "I am saying the evidence at the time was buried. I was not yet in a position to stop it. I was in a position later to find some of the people involved. By then, you and your father were already collapsing under debt and relocation. I established the trust." I laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "So this is charity." "No." "Debt repayment then. Guilt management. Pick one." Her expression changed for the first time. A flicker. Barely there. Something like anger and grief colliding and being crushed back into order. "I did not marry you to settle guilt," she said. "If this were charity, I would have transferred the debt and left your name out of it. If this were concealment, I would not have amended the contract to open the file. Then why?" She looked at my left hand, at the ring she had just put there, and said, "Because someone moved on the continuity file 3 days ago. And marriage was the only instrument fast enough to pull you under principal protection before arbitration transferred you elsewhere. That cut through the anger because it was not the answer I expected." "Elsewhere where?" "Not a place, a structure. Your father's concealed debt was purchased in fragments by shell funds tied to a consortium I've been tracking for years. They used debt arbitration to acquire people with specific registry markers. I almost said that was insane, except I had spent my entire life watching sane language cover violent systems. "What registry marker?" This time she hesitated long enough to be honest. "Your juvenile file classification." I stared at her. "What classification?" She touched the signet at her finger, and a slim panel opened in the wall beside us. Private terminal concealed behind decorative stone. She keyed in 2 codes, added her thumbprint, then stepped aside and let me read. The screen displayed my birth registry, as sealed annotations, and a tag I had never seen because ordinary citizens cannot view their own protected intake flags without court order. Subject: Vale Aaron. Juvenile continuity status. ORIC response candidate. Inactive source, clinic intake anomaly/incident file redacted. I read it twice, 3 times. The letters did not become meaning. "ORIC response candidate," I repeated. "What is that?" Celine's voice stayed level. "A rare neurological field sensitivity marker. Most cases remain dormant, some do not." "I'm a mechanic." "You are also the child who survived an underworks fire with no thermal lung damage, while 2 adults beside him died." I looked at her so hard my eyes hurt. I had no memory of the fire beyond heat, screaming metal, and waking in a hospital. I had heard that survival explained with luck so many times it had become part of my family's mythology. "Who else knows this?" I asked. "Not many. Fewer now than before. but someone reactivated the file. That is why the debt came due all at once. The canal lights reflected in the terminal screen, cutting through the text like moving blades. I should have walked out. I thought about it. I thought about throwing the ring into the canal and letting her lawyers and guards and debt officers chase me through Upper Crescent on camera. I thought about all the years of hidden money and sealed files and decisions made over my life in rooms I was never invited into. Instead, I asked, "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Celine's jaw tightened, just slightly. Because juvenile protection seals are not optional, and because every attempt to contact you directly was monitored after age 12. Monitored by who? The same network now buying your debt. She closed the terminal panel with one motion. I kept distance because proximity would have exposed you. Tonight, distance stopped working. There it was, not an apology, a tactical explanation. It should have made me hate her more. It did, a little. And it also made the room feel dangerous in a way the marriage contract had not. I realized then that the house was too quiet. Not peaceful, controlled. Staff moved without noise. Doors locked without visible panels. Security stood where architecture thinned. This was not merely a rich woman's residence. It was a fortified node. Principal protection, I said. That's what this is. Yes. And I'm supposed to trust the woman who bought my debt and put a ring on my hand to save me from people I can't see. She held my gaze. No, trust is not the current requirement. Compliance is. I almost swung at her for that one. I did not because I wanted answers more than the temporary satisfaction of being dragged out by guards. Before I could speak again, every light in the corridor flickered. Not a normal dip. A hard pulse. White to dark to emergency amber. Alarms did not sound. That was worse. Celine turned immediately toward the inner doors and touched the signet at her wrist. Lock tier 3. Nothing happened. She tried again, sharper this time. Lock tier 3. Still nothing. For the first time since she arrived in my life, her face showed something close to surprise. Move, she said, and grabbed my sleeve. I pulled back on reflex. What? The glass at the far end of the corridor shattered inward. Not from a bullet, from pressure. A circular sigil burned through the panel, and the safety laminate peeled like skin under heat. 3 figures came through the breach in matte field cloaks, masks blank, movements disciplined. Not thieves, not district enforcers. They spread in a practiced triangle, and one of them raised a rod etched with rotating marks that made the hair rise on my arms from 20 feet away. Celine stepped in front of me before I could think. Stay behind me, she said. Who are they? Debt recovery contractors, she said, eyes fixed on the lead intruder. And they should not be able to breach this level. The lead figure tilted his head, almost polite, and spoke through a mask modulator. Principal Ardent, by contested arbitration emergency transfer, the continuity subject is no longer under your exclusive claim. He held up a warrant slate. Even from where I stood, I saw the seal flash valid. A safe system had failed. Not the glass, the authority. Celine's voice went cold enough to make the corridor feel smaller. That order is impossible. Not anymore, the masked figure said. The rod in his hand spun once, and the marks on it aligned. My chest tightened before anything visible happened. Heat climbed my spine. The lights overhead flickered again, this time in rhythm with the rod's rotation. Somewhere behind my eyes, I felt a pressure like a second heartbeat trying to start. Celine looked back at me, really looked, and whatever she saw made her decision immediate. Aaron, she said low and controlled, if I tell you to run, you run. You do not touch the rod. Do not speak if they begin recitation. And if the walls shift, the walls what? Run. The lead contractor took one step forward and began to read from the warrant. The words were legal language at first. Debt transfer, contested asset continuity, enforcement jurisdiction. Then the cadence changed. The marks on the rod brightened. The air in the corridor thickened, pressure building against my ears. Celine's signet flashed, and a defensive line ignited across the floor in front of us. a thin white barrier cutting the corridor in two. The contractor didn't stop reading. His two flankers moved wide, hands raised, and I saw it then. Faint threads of light connecting their wrists to the rod, to the warrant slate, to the broken glass edges still glowing at the breach. Contract tech, sigil-linked enforcement, not just law backed by force, law weaponized as field architecture. Celine had married me into a war I did not understand. And whoever came through that glass had brought paperwork sharp enough to cut through her locks. The contractor kept reading, and the corridor started answering him. That was the first thing I understood about the power system, even before anyone explained it properly. In our world, a contract is not just paper if it's written with the right seal geometry and enough authority behind it. The language itself can bind field behavior. Every clause is a path. Every witness is a battery. Every valid seal is permission for reality to cooperate. The rod in his hand wasn't a weapon by itself. It was an execution key. Celine's floor-line barrier brightened to a hard white strip across the corridor. The contractor's warrant sigil pressed against it and hissed, sparks peeling off in thin arcs. His two flankers widened their stance, feeding more current through the linked threads at their wrists. Ardent principal counterclaim recognized, the lead said through the mask, voice still almost courteous. Override pending continuity activation. I had no idea what any of that meant. My chest did. The pressure behind my ribs intensified. Heat ran up my spine and into my throat, like I'd swallowed boiling wire. The lights above us flickered in sync with the rod, then skipped a beat and flashed gold. Celine heard it before I did. No, she said, not to me, but to the rhythm itself. She turned half sideways and hit a recessed panel in the wall with her palm. A compartment snapped open. Inside sat a narrow case lined in black felt and 6 thin metal strips etched with tiny sigils. She grabbed 2 and slapped one onto my wrist and one against the base of my neck. The burning didn't stop, but the pressure narrowed, like she had put a valve on it. "What is that?" I gasped. "Suppression tabs." Her eyes never left the contractor's. "Temporary. Don't tear them off." The lead contractor tilted his head. You concealed activation signs from the registry. That is a reportable offense." Celine said, "You forged emergency transfer chain through a district magistrate node. Save your ethics for court." One of the flankers moved his hand, and the broken glass at the far end of the corridor lifted off the floor in a trembling crescent, drawn by the rod's field. Not telekinesis. Resonant lift through the etched residue on the breach sigil. I didn't know the terms yet, but I knew danger when it floated sharp things in front of me. Celine's signet flashed again. A second barrier line rose, vertical this time, angling from floor to ceiling like a slanted shield. The suspended glass shards hit it and turned white hot before dropping harmlessly. "Run now," she said without looking back. I didn't move, partly because I was stubborn, partly because I was angry, mostly because the corridor behind us had already sealed, and the only open path was past the people trying to claim me under a weaponized dead order. "Where?" I snapped. Her jaw tightened. "For once in your life, do not argue while being hunted." That almost made me obey. Then the lead contractor changed cadence again and spoke my full birth name with registry sequence. Every hair on my arm stood up. The suppression tabs on my skin flared. My knees nearly gave. Something answered from inside me. I don't mean courage. I mean a field response. Gold static licked across my fingers for half a second, and the corridor lights all blew at once. Darkness swallowed us. The emergency strips came on red. In that red light, everyone moved. Celine stepped through her own barrier line before I realized she could do that, and drove her forearm into the lead contractor's wrist, breaking his reading rhythm. The rod clanged against the floor. One flanker lunged. She pivoted, caught his sleeve, and slammed him into the glass wall hard enough to crack the inner laminate. The second flanker brought up a seal plate. It was triangular and humming, and the air around it warped. I finally ran. Not away from her. Past the sidewall where she'd opened the compartment, because I saw a service hatch I was sure hadn't been visible a second earlier. I grabbed the handle, locked. Behind me, Celine barked, "Left side, blood key." "What?" "Smear the latch, move." I had split knuckles from the workshop and fresh cuts from the broken corridor. I smeared blood across the latch line. The hatch flashed once and popped inward. I dropped into a narrow maintenance passage as something detonated in the corridor behind me with a sound like a steel beam exhaling. The hatch slammed shut on its own. I was in darkness for one beat. Then low blue guidelines ignited along the floor. My breathing sounded too loud. My wrist and neck tabs were still burning. The heat in my chest had become a pulse, regular now, not gone. Like something had woken and was listening. I wanted to go back. I wanted to get out. I wanted to tear the ring off and throw it into a vent. Instead, I moved because she had said, "If the walls shift, run." And the walls had absolutely shifted. The passage opened into a narrow control room lined with old relay cabinets and analog switches. The kind rich houses keep hidden because newer systems can be hacked and old systems can still save your life. A map wall lit as I entered, showing Ardent House in layered security zones. Multiple red markers were moving through upper corridors. Not just 3 intruders, at least 9. A soft tone sounded from the console, and Celine's voice came through a private line, clipped and steady over background impacts. "Can you hear me?" "Yes." "Good. Stay in secondary spine room 4. Do not open any door unless I give the code." "What code?" "Gray 7, North Line." I stared at the red markers. "You said debt contractors." "That's a strike team." "It's both." "Celine." A pause. I heard her breathing, then a muffled grunt like she'd blocked another hit. "Speak. Stop giving me half-truths while armed people are reading my name like a trigger." "Silence, then." "Fair." Something crashed on her end. When she came back, her voice was lower. "The registry marker on your juvenile file is not just a medical anomaly. ORIC candidates can act as living attunement anchors. Rarely. Unreliably. If activated under contract protocols, your response can stabilize or amplify sealed systems." I looked at the ring on my hand. "That's why they want me." "Yes." "And why you designated me years ago." A longer pause this time. "Yes." The answer hit like a blow, even though I'd already guessed the shape of it. I gripped the console edge. "So I was an asset." "No," she said immediately, sharp enough to cut through static. "You were a child in the same file they were hunting. I used the only legal structure that let me hide you inside protected continuity." That still sounds like ownership. "It was custody without contact," she said, and I heard strain in her voice for the first time. "You think I don't know what it looked like? I signed every restriction myself." There was a burst of interference. The line crackled. A different voice bled through for half a second, one of the intruders masked and calm. "Primary target response spike confirmed." Then the channel cleared. Celine said, "Listen carefully. There's a sealed drawer beneath the map console. Open it." I found the release latch under the metal lip and pulled. A shallow drawer slid out. Inside was a packet wrapped in oilcloth, a thin black notebook, and a letter with an old hospital seal broken at one edge. My stomach dropped. I knew that seal. Not from memory exactly, but from boxes in my father's office. At the clinic network where my mother had worked before the merger, names changed. "Why do you have this?" I asked. "Because she left it with me," Celine said. For a second, I forgot the alarms, the red markers, the armed contractors. "My mother?" "Yes." The control room door shuddered under a distant impact somewhere in the passage, reminding me time was still moving. Celine continued before I could ask 10 questions at once. "Open the letter. If I lose this line, you read to the end and follow the notebook instructions. Do not let them take you to a magistrate node. Do you understand?" I had no voice, so I nodded before remembering she couldn't see it. "Yes." The line cut. Not static this time, deliberate silence. I stood in a hidden control room, married to a woman I'd met an hour ago. while attackers with valid seals moved through her house and my dead mother's letter waited in my hand. I opened it with shaking fingers. The paper was old enough to crack at the folds. The handwriting was my mother's. I knew it instantly, the narrow slant, the way she pressed too hard on downstrokes when she was angry or scared. If you are reading this, then Celine failed at the only promise I asked her to keep, which was distance. I had to stop and breathe. The next lines were worse. That is not an insult. It means the people I reported found your name anyway. Aaron, if this reaches you when you are grown, then I need you to know two things before anyone else defines your life for you. First, the clinic intake incident on your file was real. You responded to a field surge no child should have survived. Second, you are not property, not a battery, not a solution they can invoice. I sat down on the floor because my legs stopped negotiating. The letter wasn't long. It didn't read like a dramatic confession. It read like my mother always sounded when she had already made a decision and was trying to stay practical for someone else's sake. She wrote that she discovered a covert program buried inside eligibility routing after the merger talks started. Children with unusual field tolerance markers flagged for continuity placement moved through debt systems and guardianship contracts into corporate-controlled environments. She wrote that she copied records and brought them to Celine, who at the time was internal operations and, in my mother's words, one of the few executives who still reacted like a human being when shown what the company was becoming. She wrote that Celine warned her to disappear. She stayed anyway because she thought the evidence would hold if she filed it through the proper channels. It did not. At the end, there was one paragraph addressed to me without explanation. Just instructions. If your chest ever starts answering a seal before your mind understands why, leave the room, break the rhythm, and do not let anyone finish reading your full registry sequence. Your body will try to complete patterns under pressure. It feels like drowning in light. It passes faster if you move and look at something ordinary. I read that twice. Break the rhythm. Don't let them finish reading the sequence. The contractors in the corridor had nearly done exactly that. My eyes dropped to the thin black notebook in the drawer. I opened it. Inside were hand-drawn sigil sketches, house route maps, and field notes in two handwritings. Celine's, crisp and angular. My mother's, smaller, tighter, full of margin notes correcting things. The first page was titled in block letters, Auric Response Suppression/Emergency Interference Methods, non-academic. There were practical instructions, breath pacing, conductive grounding points, how to identify resonance rods by edge markings, how to disrupt recitation cadence with noise, impact or asymmetrical movement, what kinds of seals amplify under blood witness, which ones fail if a named subject crosses an unsealed waterline. It was a survival manual, not a lab file, not a corporate protocol, a manual written for me before I was old enough to read it. The control room door rang with a harder impact. Closer now. I wiped my face with my sleeve because I had apparently started crying without noticing. Then I stood up and forced my eyes to the map. Red markers on the upper corridor. Two peeled away toward my position. Break the rhythm. Move. Look at something ordinary. The most ordinary thing in the room was a rust stain under an old conduit bracket. I stared at it until my breathing steadied. Then I started working. I'm a mechanic, not a fighter, not an executive. Give me a system, though, and I can usually tell what it assumes about the people using it. Ardent House's hidden spine room assumed one person sheltering, maybe two, waiting for locks to hold. It did not expect the sheltering person to begin rerouting analog relays with a screwdriver and a nail file from a prep kit. I found the manual override for passage lighting and set the blue guidelines to strobe on a 2-beat skip. I pulled the old sprinkler purge for the service corridor outside the room. Unsealed water line, just like the notebook note. I hard-switched the map display to mirror false room occupancy signatures in 3 empty compartments. Then I took the suppression tab packet, peeled one spare strip, and tucked it into my sleeve next to the ring. The door impact came again, then stopped. A masked voice outside, closer than I liked. Secondary spine room. Seal reads occupied. Another voice answered. Recitation team inbound, hold the door. I grabbed the console line and reopened the private channel on every frequency I could find. Celine, I said, if you can hear me, they're bringing a recitation team to spine room 4. Static. Then, faintly, Ren, I've got your old map in the notebook. I can flood the corridor. Can you drop power on this segment? No, they're using my own emergency authority stack against me. Can you access relay cabinet 3? I looked. Yes. Top rail, red ceramic bridge. Break it when they start reading. Will that open the door? It will kill the room seals for 6 seconds. 6? That's what I have. The line crackled out again. I moved to cabinet 3 and found the red ceramic bridge, small as a knuckle bone. I braced the nail file under it and waited. Outside I heard boots repositioning, metal scraping. Then a new voice, older, unmasked, speaking with the bored cadence of a professional who has done terrible things too many times to perform them emotionally. Continuity subject Aaron Vale, he began. My chest flared immediately. I slammed the lighting strobe. The corridor outside burst into off-time flashes through the door seam. The voice paused, as then continued louder. I yanked the sprinkler purge. Water hammered the passage. He started the registry sequence. I broke the ceramic bridge. The room went dark. Dead dark. And every hidden lock in the walls clicked open at once. The door seal dropped with a heavy thunk. I threw myself through it. The first contractor outside had expected a door breach, not a body. My shoulder hit his ribs. We both went into the flooded corridor and skidded. His seal plate sparked as water crossed the active lines. The recitation man stepped back on instinct. Good boots, expensive, not built for ankle-deep conductive mess. I heard my mother's line in my head, break the rhythm. So I yelled. Not words at first, just noise. Then, because fear turns you specific, read it again in the water, coward. The recitation man raised a rod, not the same one as before, slimmer, with double-edge marks, and the hairs on my arms rose. The contractor I'd slammed grabbed for me, and I jammed the spare suppression strip against his exposed wrist where his glove had shifted. The strip flared gold. He screamed and let go, not because it burned him like fire, but because it disrupted the active line running through his cuff seal. His partner's linked thread snapped sideways and took out the corridor light housing in a shower of sparks. The recitation cadence broke completely. For one stupid second, I thought I might actually get away. Then the older man looked at me, really looked, and smiled without warmth. Live response, he said softly. So the file was right. He raised the rod again and changed tactics. No recitation. Direct trigger. The markings aligned. Pain detonated in my chest. I dropped to one knee in the water, vision whitening at the edges. The corridor lights strobed gold in time with my heartbeat. The ring on my hand heated until I thought skin would peel under it. Movement at the far end. Celine came through the corner like a blade, coat half burned at one sleeve, signet bright enough to hurt the eyes. She didn't charge the recitation man first. She hit the wall panel beside him with her palm. The corridor emergency shutters dropped between us and the rear team, splitting the contractor's formation in half. Rule bending, system against itself. Then she went for the rod. The older man was ready this time. He rotated the rod and caught her signet line on a cross angle, sparks tearing between the etched surfaces. She drove in anyway, took a strike across the shoulder that would have dropped anyone I knew, and slammed her forehead into his mask hard enough to crack one lens. The flooded corridor amplified everything. Light, noise, pain. I was still on one knee, chest trying to complete a rhythm the rod had forced open. Celine shouted without turning, "Aaron, ground it!" I had no idea what that meant. Then I saw the open conduit panel behind the shattered light housing. At a copper braid hanging loose into the water. Ground it. I plunged my hand, ring and all, into the flood and grabbed the braid. I do not recommend this. The world went white. Not metaphor. White, then gold, then a pattern of lines I could feel more than see. as if the whole corridor had become a diagram, and every seal in it was suddenly visible from the inside. The rod's cadence, Celine's signet architecture, the contractor's linked cuffs, the emergency shutter lock, the water line, my own heartbeat trying to sync to the strongest command in the space. For one impossible second, I understood the problem. Too many valid instructions. My body was choosing the loudest. So I did the only thing I could think of, and hit the emergency shutter release with my free hand. Not because I knew it would work, because it was ordinary metal under my palm, and I needed a non-sigil action to break the pattern. The shutter dropped another foot, clipping the recitation man's arm and knocking the rod loose. The cadence vanished. The pressure in my chest collapsed like a wave pulling back. I hit the floor face first in filthy water and tasted iron. When I could see again, Celine had the rod pinned under her heel, and the older contractor against the wall with a signet line at his throat. Her breathing was ragged now. Blood darkened the white sleeve of her coat. The contractors behind the shutter were hammering the metal, trying to force it up. She looked down at me. "Can you stand?" "Probably not elegantly." "That will do." She hauled me up one-handed and kicked the rod into the waterline drain. The older contractor, mask half broken, was still trying to compose himself into professional calm. He looked past Celine at me and said, almost conversationally, "Do you know what she didn't tell you? Principal custody placements aren't free. She built half her company making deals with the same system she claims to hate." Celine tightened the signet line. "Oh, you are in no position to negotiate narrative." He made a choking sound that might have been a laugh. "Narrative? I'm talking history." I looked at her. Not because I believed him, because I had learned in one night that every accusation in this world came wrapped around at least one true thing. Celine met my eyes for half a second and said, "Later." It wasn't enough, but the shutter was buckling, and later was better than dying in a corridor while debating corporate ethics. She dragged me toward a side stair hidden behind another panel. We climbed 3 levels through service shafts, while alarms finally began to sound throughout the house. Too late. Either their overrides had suppressed alerts until now, or someone inside had only just regained command. At the top of the shaft, we emerged into a room I recognized from news backgrounds. Her private strategy office, all glass screens and dark wood, and one wall-sized city grid map. Except now half the screens were flickering with breach notices and arbitration injunctions. Legal attacks layered over physical ones in real time. Safe systems failing everywhere. Celine sealed the door manually and leaned against the desk for one beat, eyes closed. Up close, she looked less like the woman from the screens and more like someone who had been fighting this exact war for a long time without telling anyone where the bruises came from. I said, "He said you built your company using the same system." She opened her eyes, no denial. I did. The honesty hit harder than an excuse would have. "Then why should I trust any of this?" "You shouldn't trust it because I say so." She crossed to a wall cabinet, keyed it open, and pulled out a locked archive box. "You should read the records and decide what kind of enemy I am." She set the box on the desk and opened it with her signet. Inside were files, physical and digital, tagged with dates spanning nearly 20 years. Merger memos, internal objections, your payment ledgers, protected trust disbursements, security petitions, copies of appeals denied by ministries. Some pages were signed by her. Some were signed against her recommendations. Some were stamped executed anyway. One file sat on top, thinner than the rest. Mara Vale /incident response /sealed witness note. My hands started shaking again. Celine noticed and, for the first time all night, spoke without command in her voice. "I could not raise you openly," she said. "I could not even contact you safely after a point, so I did what your mother forced me to promise. School fees, clinic cover, rent buffers, quiet interventions when debt collectors came too close. I placed tutors under contract who never knew why they were there. The machine shop grant after the flood? Mine. The district technical exam fee you missed and somehow got reinstated? Mine. The medic who reset your arm and waived the implant charge? Ardent house physician on a false roster. I stared at her. Fragments of my life shifted. The scholarship letter that arrived after a clerical reconsideration. The landlord suddenly accepting reduced rent one winter. The old woman who taught me advanced relay math for 6 months and then vanished when her grandson recovered. A parts supplier giving my father impossible credit after the flood. I had called all of it luck. You were there, I said, and hated how small it sounded. Not there, she said. Around. The distinction should have comforted me. It didn't. It hurt in a different place. Why the marriage? I asked again, quieter this time. Because the continuity file moved into contested arbitration, and I ran out of time to protect you at distance. She looked at the ring on my hand. I chose an instrument I knew how to control. And me? A pause. I chose survival first. Your consent came second. I know what that cost. Outside the office, as something heavy hit the corridor, and security voices shouted overlapping commands, her house teams had either regrouped or another breach team had reached this level. She glanced at the door, then back at me. We do not have enough people to hold the house if they've compromised the lower locks and magistrate channels together. They expected to remove you under paperwork, not kill us here, which means they still need a lawful shell around the extraction. That buys minutes, not hours. Then what? She touched the city grid map and 3 routes lit up in different colors. We leave. 1 route to ministry protection, 1 to a private shield house, 1 to an old clinic archive your mother used before the merger. If I'm right, the remaining original intake logs are there. I looked at the map. You want me to choose? Yes. Why? Because if I keep choosing for you, we arrive at the same room by a different corridor. That almost made me laugh, which would have felt insane. And instead, I looked at the routes and thought about everything that had happened in the last 2 hours. Ministry protection meant official custody, lawful, visible, and probably compromised. Private shield house meant hiding inside Celine's systems again. Old clinic archive meant evidence, answers, and danger. My chest still ached where the rod had nearly forced a response pattern. My hand smelled like burnt copper. My mother's letter was in my pocket, damp at the folds. The clinic, I said. Celine nodded once, no approval in it, just commitment. Then we go to the clinic. She slid a compact seal tag across the desk to me. Keep this on your wrist next to the suppression tab. It masks short-range registry scans if they're using debt enforcement readers. I took it. Are we still pretending this is a marriage? Her mouth moved, not a smile exactly, but the memory of one that had forgotten how. For the next hour, it may be the only legal shield we have. Yet, the door locks behind us flashed from green to amber to red. Someone on the other side had just acquired higher authority. Celine killed the office lights, opened a hidden panel behind the grid map, and revealed a narrow descent shaft with ladder rungs dropping into darkness. Before she stepped in, I said, "One more thing." She looked back. "If we survive this, no more not here. No more sealed half answers. You tell me everything." She held my gaze in the dark office while the door seal whined under external override pressure. "Agreed," she said. We went down the shaft as the office door blew inward above us. I climbed after the woman I had been forced to marry, carrying my mother's letter in my pocket and a suppression tag burning against my skin, while armed contractors and legal warrants tore through the house behind us. Somewhere below, the old city waited with records people had killed to hide. Somewhere behind us, the life I thought was mine had already been broken open. By the time we reached the lower tunnel and the first cold draft from the canal conduits hit my face, I understood one thing clearly. She had not secretly raised me to make me obedient. She had kept me alive long enough to become inconvenient.